1960s news report, we have a good lineup.
Today we have a manual on the women's rights movement and music today.
Thank you, Thomas. The feminist movement is a social and political movement that are trying to establish gender equality. This will transform how we perceive, how we view women. Lately, the feminist movement have established organization that represents the ideas and leading to the establishment of gender equality. Furthermore, the leaders of the feminist movement have been pressurizing the politicians to recognize the gender discrimination that exists in the American society. Also, music in this decade have been a huge explosion. Rock music comes of age and this dominates the popular music. And there are major factors, and two major factors that have influenced the fundamental meaning of music in this decade are rock and roll and Beatles. And lately, songwriters have included social consciousness and political statements into the songs. Also, television has been a major force in attracting young viewers to music. Back to you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Today we have many big events happening right now.
Here we have Marcio talking about the events.
Thanks, Thomas. Alright, the Cold War. The Cold War was a state of political and military tension after World War II between US and the Soviet Union in 1947 through 1991. These two countries became known as superpowers. Although the two superpowers never officially declared war on each other, they fought in proxy wars. These proxy wars were fought between other countries, but with each side getting support from different superpowers. These proxy wars included the Korean War, Vietnam War, the Soviet-Afghanistan War, and the arms race and the space race. Although the Soviet Union played an important role in the Allied powers, there was great distrust between the Soviet Union and the rest of the Allies. These countries, the Allied powers, were concerned with the strict leadership of Joseph Stalin, as well as the spread of communism. The Cold War came to an end with the defeat of the Soviet Union in 1990. Alright, now with the Great Society, a domestic program in the administration of President Lyndon B. Johnson that instituted federally sponsored social welfare programs. The goal of the Democratic Party was to chiefly enact domestic programs to improve education, provide medical care for the elderly, and eliminate poverty. Because of this, many acts were passed. For example, the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, the Volunteers in Service to America, VISTA, and the Wilderness Protection Act. Because of the Great Society, it saved many American lives.
See you guys.
Back to you guys.
Alright, thanks, Marcio. Today we have Sergio interviewing Martin Luther King Jr.
Thank you, Thomas. Now, what do you think of Malcolm X?
With Malcolm X, I like the fact that he's touching the racial barriers and that he's trying to pressurize the politicians to see the discrimination that exists against African Americans. But I kind of dislike the way he's approaching it. I mean, you cannot defeat hate with hate. And it's only by the power of love that can diminish the essence of hatred. But overall, I like the fact he's fighting for African Americans, and not only for the African Americans, but I like the fact he's fighting for all races.
Alright. Also, what about your I Have a Dream speech?
In the past few days, I've been getting this dream, and I think it has been granted by God. I dreamt about the American society in the near future. There will be a day the whites accepted African Americans and Mexicans. We were all bounded by love. Hatred never existed anymore. And I believe that we're coming to that future. We're coming to that near future. And I believe that racism will be no more.
Alright. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Sergio. The presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower ended at the start of 1961. His presidency during the 1960s was fairly uneventful. However, it was plagued with a short-lived recession. The more eventful presidency, however, was that of John F. Kennedy, who was inaugurated in January 1961. The New Frontier was his plan to improve the economy, education, healthcare, and civil rights. His policies were highlighted by the Equal Pay Act, deficit spending, cautious steps towards civil rights. He also launched the first man on the moon during his space race. After Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, took over office. He continued Kennedy's civil rights policies. He fought to expand economic opportunity during war on poverty and his Economic Opportunity Act. However, Johnson's legacy was often mentioned along with the Vietnam War. Under the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, Johnson was able to commit U.S. troops to South Vietnam without Congress asking to declare war. Now for assassinations. Many assassinations are happening during this time period. Because of rising tensions with the civil rights movement and foreign affairs, John F. Kennedy was assassinated as he drove through the Greeley Plaza in downtown Dallas, Texas, preparing for his next presidential campaign. Kennedy was shot multiple times by Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner, and was rushed to the Parkland Memorial Hospital where he later passed away. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated April 4th, 1968 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. He was standing at the balcony of his room when he was shot. His assassination sent shockwaves throughout the country as many protests were spurred. Robert F. Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy, was assassinated in 1968 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles after winning a California primary during his campaign for presidency. He was shot several times by Palestinian Sirhan Sirhan, who believed that Kennedy was instrumental in the oppression of Palestinians. Back to you, Sergio.
Thanks. Now to you, Alex.
Hey Thomas, the 60s fashion was an era of the girl group, the supermodel, and the IT girls. The early 60s was reminiscent of the 50s, conservative, restrained, and classy, whereas the late 60s were the exact opposite, psychedelic, colorful, long hair, and tie-dye. Women wore short skirts while men wore tunics and capes. The 60s broke many fashion trends while featuring culottes, go-go boots, and the bikinis. Designers were pumping out more clothes which were suitable for the younger generation whilst exposing more of their bodies. Protests and counterculture in the 1960s. The 1960s was full of many protests and movements such as the Civil Rights Movement, the Student Movement, the Anti-Vietnam Movement, the Gay Rights Movement, and the Environmental Movement, each varying from government policy to significance and most importantly how it changed many Americans' lives today. The supporters of this movement questioned traditional practices about how people were being treated, similar to the counterculture of the 1960s, where the supporters believed in civil rights movement and disobeyed traditional authority, with sex, drugs, and rock and roll music. Both believed in being different and standing out from the crowd in rebellious ways. Now back to you guys.
Thanks. The Vietnam War is a commonly used name for a Second Indochina War from 1954 to 1973. Usually is referred to the period when the United States and other members of CEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, joined the forces of the Republicans of South Vietnam, contesting communist forces comprised of South Vietnam guerrillas, and regular forces unit general known as Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. The United States had the largest foreign military presence and basically directed the war from 1965 to 1968. For the reason in Vietnam today it is known as the American War, it was a direct result of the First Indochina War from 1946 to 1954 between French, which claimed Vietnam as a colony, and the Communist force, then known as Vietnam. In 1973, a third Vietnam War began, in continuation actually between North and South Vietnam, but both significant for the U.S. involvement. It ended with a communist victory in April 1975. The Vietnam War was the longest in the U.S. history until the war in Afghanistan that began in 2002 and continued at the writing of 2013. It was an extremely decisive in the U.S., Europe, Australia, and elsewhere because of the U.S. failed to achieve a military victory and the republics of South Vietnam was ultimately taken over by North Vietnam. The Vietnam experience became known as the only war Americans ever lost. It remains a very controversial topic that continues to affect politics and military decisions today.
That's all we have for today. Thank you, Thomas. Tune in next time.